Welcome to the Epic Tales from the Sewers podcast. Grab yourself a slice, strap into the party wagon, and hang on tight. Give it up for your hosts, the Cowabunga Combo, Justin and Eric.
All right, folks, welcome to a special episode of the Epic Tales from the Sewers podcast. I am your host, Justin. Here with me, as always, is my my co-host, Mr. Eric Will.
How you doing there, Justin?
I'm good. A little static in the sewer tonight, but that's fine. We'll deal with that. We are brought to you by our sponsors, Deadly Grounds Coffee. Once you go deadly, you drink more because the coffee's delicious. So, you know, that's their very verbose theme song. But we have a guest with us today. Our special guest has had numerous roles in the 2014 documentary Turtle Power, the definitive history of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, including producer, executive producer, cinematographer, among many more. And I'm sure he'll talk about that. But he does have a Kickstarter with a few more days left called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Evolution, Mutation, and Reboot. Welcome the accomplished Isaac Elliot-Fisher.
Here I am. Wow, we got some interesting feedback on all the channels here, guys. Yep. That's pretty fun. An equally follically challenged man, just like you guys.
A pallid one, too.
Thanks, guys. Let's dig into some turtle history.
All right. So, thanks for joining us. Before we go into everything with TMNT, Evolution, Mutation, and Reboot, what is your history with Ninja Turtles? How did you get started? What's your origin story?
Well, I mean, like you guys, I grew up with the brand, but maybe in a slightly unique. How is it unique? We all grew up with it in a similar way, and we're probably the last true generation of kids who didn't have necessarily full access to everything we liked. So I was no exception to that for sure, because I was a funny little homeschool kid in a very small rural town in Ontario. And man, there's some crazy microphone stuff going on over there at Eric's house. It's like his microphone keeps switching up and he's taking off his headphones. It's I'm sorry.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes. Yeah. You sound better now, but your microphone keeps going. Anyway, we're back on. And so anyway, so the I mean, I was a funny little homeschool kid in a rural town, and we didn't have cable often. We would have it sometimes. So, you know, like with anything that you don't have full access to, but it seems so unbelievably cool, you want to get access to it, you tend to overly invest in what little scraps of that thing you can have. So I think a lot of, if you look at this, you know, kids who grew up in the 70s and into the 80s, is that we were the last kind of groups where it's like, yeah, if you lived in a backwater town and you found a magazine and it talked about this musician named David Bowie and you needed to find that, it was you had to hunt it down. You had to search it and invest time and effort into it. So I think Turtles had a certain, even though it was ubiquitous and it was everywhere and it was on everything, there was an indiness to it that was really appealing to us kids at the time that I latched onto, and I probably only saw maybe one episode, if that. I have a vivid memory of seeing the end credits with that April in the Turtles standing in that kind of underground kind of vaulted area where the Technodrome was, and it was like, you know, this feeling of like, oh, I missed it. You know, like that's my sad feeling about, you know, my memory of the cartoon as a kid, is that it was like, oh, I just missed it. And but it wasn't until college, when I went to film school, that at that time in your life, usually in your 20s, when you start kind of nostalgically looking back and what were the brands that I liked when I was a kid. And I don't know why, but I was like, I just got in my head that I would maybe start collecting toys, and going back and looking at Turtles as one of my favorite brands as a kid, one of many, but one of my favorites for sure. You know, I turned 5 in 1990, so that was like, you know, prime Turtle time. we spent a good 3 months of that year in the UK and France, so it was actually kind of funny because I was exposed to Hero Turtles at the exact same moment. So it was like I came back very confused because I had like a book where like half the turtles were carrying swords. That was a Hero Turtles book that we bought over in England, and anyway, so
collectible now, I bet.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, I mean, it was really confusing because it was like the turtles were like fighting this like giant octopus monster, and they all had swords, and they were like, or at least two of them had swords, and so those were obviously, now when you look at it, very badly, redone. So anyway, the in college I kind of got digging into what was the history of Kevin and Peter, and I didn't know who they were, and I was getting into that history. So I had already kind of done. I never really intended on being a documentary filmmaker per se. That wasn't a career goal. I wanted to be a cinematographer of narrative, like movies, and so I had already done this kind of quasi-documentary on another passion of mine, which was this Toyota Land Cruiser 4x4 movie that I was like when I was 19, when I was like before film school. And so I had this idea in my head that I could take things that I was really interested in and research them through and kind of fulfill my interest by making a product, by making a documentary about something, which I still kind of carry through to this day. If I am invested in something, I've got to make something with it. So I had this idea, and I was poking around the internet. I had sent some emails to Mirage, and they were like, "Yeah, thanks, but no." And I was coming out of film school at the time, and I was starting to work with these two guys from my hometown. Again, very small rural town in Ontario, Canada, and we were making music videos and commercials and doing small-timey kind of stuff. And I said to these guys on a Thanksgiving, Canadian Thanksgivings in a different time of the year, so in October of 2008, I said, "Hey, let's do a documentary on the Ninja Turtles." And
2008.
Yeah, so it was 2008, and these two guys that I was working with, they were like maybe 20 years my senior, so they didn't really grow up with the brand. It wasn't their thing. They knew about it. Like Randall knew the comics. He had seen the comic in Toronto back in the 80s and kind of passed on it when he was a young man. And so, but they knew pop culture. They understand what we were trying. We had this vision of, or they, I guess, had this vision more than me of doing. They were listening to podcasts that were early days of podcasts, and like if you have 1,000 people, if you have a fan base and you have a thing, you can find an audience. So one of them kind of was like, I don't know, and the other one's like, yeah, you know what, we should, and then we all kind of went, yeah, I guess, that's interesting. Let's try that. And then we took baby steps, and baby steps turned into massive leaps very rapidly because we had this intention of, okay, what if we did a fan documentary and we talked to turtle fans, and let's look at what that means, because nobody else was doing documentaries on pop culture at all. Like, that wasn't really a thing yet. There was maybe King of Kong was out, I think. Not really much else.
There was that Con Men or something like that.
Yeah,
that was really out.
Yeah, and then maybe like Video Game the Movie, maybe Indie Game the Movie, maybe it just came out. I don't know. And so we were kind of cautiously kind of going, what do we do here? And so Randall Lobb, who became my business partner, and the three of us, the trifecta, and Mark Hussey, Randall phoned up Mirage again and said, listen, I'm the adult in the room. You probably got some fan vibes from this young guy who called you up and said, let's do a documentary on Turtles. So he's like, what if we did this? And Gary Richardson, the CEO, is like, listen, we can't stop you. So why don't you just stop by Mirage Studios on your, and because the idea was I would drive down to New York Comic-Con, which was February of 2009, and I said, drive down there with my cousin. Randall and Mark didn't even come with me, and my cousin was in video production and an adult, and I was in my early 20s, and I said, the intention was to stop by Mirage on the way home, get Peter and the gang there. And while at Comic-Con in New York, because this is like, again, the times were different. And it sounds crazy to say 2009 was different times, but it was. You could go to New York Comic-Con or San Diego, for that matter, with a press badge, walk right in the door, way before the con floor opened, and just be there. So, there's Gary Richardson, and they're setting up the 25th anniversary Playmates booth, and it was the sort of the start of this press tour that they were generating with this company called Peppercom. And there was a buzz and a vibe that was building up around the 25th anniversary. And again, the idea was to make a documentary that fit within the 25th anniversary. We'd finish the film and deliver it that year. So at this convention, I knew that Kevin Eastman might be there at the heavy metal booth. So there I am in this bright white Turtles t-shirt, carrying a camera bag, looking very nerdy and, turtle fanny. And I walked up to, before the con opened, to heavy metal booth. I found it, and it was empty. And Kevin was like setting up the booth and putting books out. And I'm like, hey, I'm Isaac. I'm this, turtle fan documentary guy. We're going to make a film about you. Do you want to be in it? And he's like, yeah. And we kind of hit it off very quickly. And I think that very rapidly, Randall and Mark, who were back home, getting text messages and phone calls from me going, hey, guess what? I've met this fan, and the marketing agency, Peppercom, really likes the fact that we're shooting with these suited turtles, and Kevin sounds really interested, and I think we're going to go out for a drink at the end of con, and we did. And then so we very rapidly kind of were like, okay, on the way home, we filmed some stuff at Mirage, the first kind of master interview with Peter, and which was, we interviewed them many times subsequently, but it was a sort of a start. And then that was February, and by March, we were planning on flying out to California for the first time. And I had managed to track down most of the voice cast, and it was very quickly becoming apparent that, I remember my cousin and I driving home from New York going, oh my God, we're not just, immediately it felt like we're not just doing a film about a thing like Turtles and the people who loved it, and look at this toy and look at this iteration. We're doing it with the people who made it. Because immediately with Peter in the can, you're kind of going, all right, we've got that one. And it looks like we're going to get Kevin in California. And so we had this intention of flying out there. Again, independent, filming this on our credit cards and shoestring budget. And so we said, Randall, I gave Randall Kevin's phone number, and I said, listen, Kevin says we can go film him in LA, and he has a place that maybe we can use. And we were kind of looking, gently prodding to see, okay, we need a place to film these voice cast, and we're looking at, do we rent a hall or something in LA? Is that a thing we can do? We don't have a lot of budget. How are we going to, stay in a hotel? And so Kevin's like, I'm selling this house on Mulholland Drive. You can just go up there and film there and just stay there. And we're like, oh, okay. And we kind of secretly we wanted him to
see there. Yes.
Yeah, no kidding. It was you were driving up Mulholland Drive, and the mountain goes in both directions, and you pull up to this gated community, and the guard will know that who you are. And sure enough, you pull up and you're like, hey, we're these Canadians who are going to go stay in an empty house. And they're like, cool, come on in. And this gate opens, and Gwen Stefani lived across the road or something. And it was right that same area that Britney Spears lived at the time when she was shaving her head like us. And so it was around that time. And then you come up to this house, and all the houses are built on this mountain. So you come to this house with another gate that opens. And it was empty because he was selling it. It was actually built by Alex Van Halen. It was, I think, the 5140 or whatever that album was recorded there behind the house under the swimming pool. It was like a recording studio. And he bought it from somebody else. I think it was Jenny Jones or something. So anyway, so we go into this place with inflated Walmart mattresses, no place to sit because there was no furniture. And so you go to the car to sit down because you had nowhere else to sit. And it was just bizarre. It was like you went from 0 to a million on cloud 9 right from the get-go. And that crazy roller coaster never stopped. We reunited the voice cast. That was the first time they got together in a long time. And then we were down the valley, and we went to Henson Studios, which is, of course, the famous Charlie Chaplin studio. And there's Brian Henson, and we're interviewing him, and then we're doing this, and we're doing that. So we moved around very quickly, and it became very apparent that not only was this going to get a lot bigger than we initially intended, but we also were not likely going to be able to finish it in 1 year. And then in the middle of all that, Peter says, okay, yeah, by the way, I'm also selling the Turtles to Viacom. And that changes everything.
I was just thinking that's around that time because they haven't even gotten the IDW license yet. It's still being published through Image and through Mirage.
That's right.
This was right after the 2007 TMNT film.
Yes, and we were there at the end of the 2003 show because we were there at 4Kids in New York in early to mid, maybe summer 2009, and they were wrapping up animation on what was becoming the Turtles Forever film. And that was it.
That's so interesting, too, because in rewatching Turtle Power, there's really not a presence of any of the 4Kids actors or
we had filmed them for it, but what ended up happening, to fast forward, because I know we want to get onto other stuff, but I mean, to fast forward to what ended up happening, so that film took us, roughly speaking, 5 years, because a lot of space sort of happened in there where we were waiting for things to happen, because like the property gets sold, now we're in limbo, there's no really what is going to happen with it, who do we have permissions from, what's happening next, but we were still collecting stuff, but then we got introduced to, because then we started working with the ad agency that was working with the Turtles, and we were very much embedded within the kind of community very early on the inner workings, and there was sort of this attitude that it was like, okay, here's the new executive producers of the Paramount, what was at the time the planned Paramount live action film, which was already in the works before Viacom bought it, right? Yeah. So they're already in the works. Here's Galen and Scott Mennick, Galen Walker and Scott Mennick, and they're the executive producers, and we're going to be tied to this new movie, and we're going to do all the behind the scenes, and we're going out to, these rooftop dinners going, yeah, we're going to do the behind the scenes, and you guys are going to be amazing, it's going to be this, blah, blah, blah. And of course, that's like, you think that this is all going to happen, but Hollywood, everything changes all the time. Like, it's like a slow-moving machine that also just flops and flips and goes all over the place, and things change. So within that 5 years, we would go back, and we'd shoot, and we'd go out here, and we'd do this and that, and we would have all these fits and false starts of where it was going to go, and it wasn't until Michael Bay kind of started making a mess of things PR-wise, and other companies expressed interest in buying our documentary, and we just didn't know what to do with it. We actually released a trailer, I want to say it must have been 2012 or 2013, we released a trailer and said, okay, world, this is coming, and it picked up steam really quickly, and it got some attention, and that's where we got into the door at Paramount, and Randall, my business partner, went down there to meet with the head of production, and they went, why haven't we bought this yet? What is this? And, well, it's a documentary we did. Okay, well, why haven't we bought it yet? I don't know. And so they made this deal, which is kind of like an unheard of thing, really. Like, if you read like Rodriguez's book, Rebel Without a Crew, it's like that, but with a documentary. And so we make this deal, but then they don't say anything. And we're like, well, now what? Because we're expecting them to tell us, you have X amount of time to make the film, and here's our notes. And they never did that. We had a rough cut of the film, and then all of a sudden, at the last second, they said, okay, we want the film finished and handed into quality control in 10 days. And we're like, what? So we had made the deal in November, and then they wanted the film delivered by spring of 2014 to come out in the summer of 2014, within a week of the I think, I can't remember before or after, within a week of the Bay film. Yeah. And so, again, we had collected stuff like the 2003 show. We had collected other things, but we had kind of created a movie that was really filled up of firsts, because the only stipulations we had was, you got 90 minutes. Tell your story in 90 minutes, and that's it. So you're going, okay, it's a featured film, it's 90 minutes, and we'd started developing a brand of definitive film, and we said, okay, we want to tell the most, tight-packed, full of amazing stuff, because we had uncovered incredible, never before seen behind the scenes, never before seen drawings of turtle concepts from Playmates that nobody even knew existed, all of this stuff, and I said, okay, let's do the firsts of everything. So Turtle Power 1 is like the firsts of things, even though things happened, other iterations happened after it. So we didn't have a ton of, say, Secret of the Ooze or the third film or those things. They just kind of were mentioned, right? So we had to refine it down, because if you want to give yourself enough space to tell the story of the first movie and show as much cool stuff from that, you need room. You can't show everything. It's a huge franchise, even then. So we handed the movie in under incredibly bizarre circumstances, and here's where Turtle Power 2 begins, because what we call now the TMNT Evolution Mutation Reboot, is that the week we handed it in was May 2014, I guess, because that makes sense, because that was the day that, after 5 years of discussing stuff like this with them and dropping hints and stuff, outside of our involvement, Kevin and Peter had decided to do a signing together at that Rochester, New York event, that spring, and that was the first time they were going to do a signing together in like 20 years. So we said, okay, can we go film that? And Paramount's like, yes, but we already had to hand it into quality control. You can't add any more audio. You can add a little bit of video at the end of your movie. That's it. And we're like, okay. So we go down there, and we film with them for 2 days, doing signings, and it was really nice. And then in the midst of this, Peter and Kevin, we knew where we were. We were 20 minutes north of Dover, New Hampshire, so we had driven down to where the house was, where they invented the turtles. And then Peter's like, oh, yeah, you guys went there yesterday? Yeah. I said, yeah. He goes, well, Kevin and I haven't been there together in a long time. And we're like, yeah. So we stayed a third day, and we said, okay, let's go down there with Kevin and Peter, and we'll film them walking around the property, but we can't really include it. We stuck microphones on them and said, okay, see what happens. So they walked around for like an hour and a half, and it was this incredible reunion with the two of them.
It's gorgeous,
looking at where all this stuff was. And so that became the beginning of what we're like, okay, well, I guess we're going to have to keep going here, and that was 10 years ago.
That's awesome. Like in all of that too. I know you were joking. You're like, oh, we'll fast forward. No, this story is like what people want to know. Like how the sausage is made in the sewer. So, that's that last shot of Turtle Power after the credits that you're talking about, where there's no audio and it's like this ethereal sort of thing with them.
It's an Easter egg. Yeah.
To it. It is so gorgeous, and I loved it so much. I'm so glad that you guys.
And you actually are one of the few who caught that, because not a lot of people got the Easter egg at the end. I guess we were doing it before Marvel was cool. And
it was
so
2008 where that started. So
yeah. So exactly. So it was coming out at the time, and so we were. So that was our little, and then right before the credits, you get that little moment where the two of them are signing together. Like that was that day. And then we had this retelling. So it's not necessarily that this new documentary picks up where the first one leaves off. It actually kind of starts again at the 0 point, because it's like, well, even though we're going to focus more on the things that we didn't cover in the first one, we can actually retell the origin with the two of them, because why not? It's such a beautiful reunion of them walking, oh my god, this is where the kitchen was where we invented Shredder, because you put a cheese grater on your arm and thought it would make a great weapon.
Exactly.
Right? And they're like,
Do you have any good stories from either the original cast or for the Mirage guys? It looked like the Mirage guys were having a blast. So, making this movie. Do you have any good stories from the road from making Turtle Power?
Oh man, it's endless, because we've been doing it for 15 years. So it's almost impossible to kind of pick those highlights. Other than, the story I've already sort of told with being in that house, living on the side of the mountain, and getting that really bizarre, surreal first experience like that, where you're going, I had been to LA once before to do something else on my own, filming wise, and then when I was there again this time, it was like, this will never be this cool again. When are we ever going to do this again? And while there were so many other more amazing things over the years of working on it, that one was like, okay, what a place to start, because you're never going to live, on an air mattress in Alex Van Halen's house, ever again. There was even there was a funny moment within that where we're so naive, and there was a younger guy even than me, a young kid who was just starting film school, who's an old friend of mine, came with us as kind of an assistant on the first trip. And we did some silly stuff. We drove up to San Francisco and back to interview some fans, which we never ended up using, and it was such a crazy 24-hour trip he and I did all day, all night, because it's a 6-hour or 7-hour drive to San Francisco and back from LA. So, but then one day we were walking with Kevin downtown to get some shots with him by the Hollywood sign where you would see it from the Kodak Theater there. And downtown LA or Hollywood, you get these kind of these hustlers on the side of the street who are trying to sell you their album or whatever, right? So this guy is trying to hustle Curtis. This guy is with us, and he's trying to sell him his music, his disc. And he kind of hands it to him. It's the way they do it. They puts it in his hand. And Curtis is like, "Oh, cool, thanks." Very polite Canadian kid going like, "Oh yeah, that's cool, great, eh?" And the guy's like, "Well, usually people give me money." And he's like, "Oh, okay, here's $5." So he gives him $5. And the silly thing about this is that our business partner, and it's only funny to us, like everybody else in the world will think this is just dumb, is that our business partner, his last name is Hussey, and we call him the Hustler. That's what we call him. It's his nickname. And so we get this rap album, we get in the car, we put it in, and the first song is called The Hustle King.
Oh my God.
And we're like, this is amazing. So there's this independent rap artist who hawks a disc at Curtis, who gives him way too little money at $5 or whatever on the side of the road in Hollywood, that then we take this silly album and think it's so funny that we go back to Kevin's house and proceed to film a very cheesy music video of ourselves performing the Hustle King song with a bunch of fake weapons that Kevin had in his garage. And so it's people can find it. It is on the internet. There is a music video of very young us running around pretending to be very serious white rappers.
So no chance you were going to put that as a track in the movie?
No, and goodness gracious, it's hilarious that like who like that poor guy somewhere out there has no idea that these 3 guys from Canada or 4 guys from Canada made this silly music video of his music.
He got $5, so that's
and I know that's not a total thing. I mean, there's so many other ones, like being in the vaults with Kevin in Northampton and the stuff that he would pull out of there and all sorts of crazy stuff. So I mean, there's just countless things.
You got to work with a couple folks who have passed as well. So like Michael Wise and Pete Renaday, who we David Wise, David Wise. Sorry.
Yeah. Renaday and James Avery.
Yeah,
he was there. And Renaday just passed recently. I made the mistake on another podcast recently saying that Fred Wolf had passed, but that's not true. I think he's actually still around, which is remarkable. He must be in his late 90s.
Like Don Bluth, man. Don Bluth is still kicking around.
I can't believe that. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure that
signing stuff too.
I mean, I don't think that Wolf has made any public appearance. I think if I'm not mistaken, he served in was it Korea? He served in the army during conflict. I can't remember which one it was, but it was like, he had like an Oscar for like a short film, like bizarre man.
Yeah, man, he was like really accomplished for everything that he did. So,
but and a legendary asshole. Like,
you called it, man. We had a conversation with a voice actor about something that was off the record, and he told us, and he's like, and to this day, that is why that very famous voice actor will damn to his grave the name Fred Wolf. And I'm like, damn.
People hated him. He would, and we were warned for a long time, he will sue you for walking in the room. And you're like, oh my God. So we had avoided him for years during the production, and we finally said, you know what are we doing? Why aren't we going and talking to him like he's Fred Wolf? And so Randall phones him up, and he's like, why haven't you talked to me yet? How is this a definitive film if I'm not in it? And we're like, oh, sorry, Mr. Wolf. Yeah, totally, right away. We'll be there in 5 minutes. And so, and the craziest thing is, you pull up in this place, and it still says Fred Wolf on the side of the building. I think it might not anymore, but the building was there, and over in Burbank, and we go into this parking area under the building, and it had our name printed on the thing as parking for these definitive film guys, and we come in there, and he's like, want to hold my Oscar? Let's talk. And he just was this gentle, sweet old guy that wanted to just talk about his past, and we're just like, wow. And then he takes us out for Mexican food, and you're like, when is the part where he starts suing us? Like, I don't really get it. Like, I thought we were going to be murdered for coming in the door.
That'll be part of the reboot.
I guess. I don't know when maybe he's going to sue us this time. But couldn't have been a more pleasant experience with a nice old guy who just wanted to talk about his life. And he even indicated in his interview, he's like, listen, it's like, yeah, people unhappy about things, and business is done as business is done, but that's water under the bridge. How could anybody be upset when we made this much money? Like, it is what it is. And I mean, and as much as Kevin and Peter, we're very close to them through the years, and we really are careful with their story because they are amazing individuals, the nicest people on the planet, and they were taken advantage of in so many different ways.
Oh God!
And but yet they were strong and they were smart and they knew what they were doing out of the gate, which is crazy when you think about it. And because they maintained control. Now that became a bit of a problem, and my observation is kind of looking at it from our unique perspective. And having talked to all these different players. Not that any one person has said this, but my observation is that when you look at the time frame that Kevin and Peter were working within, they had met, because we have the footage of them, having these early meetings at Playmates in January of '87. At that moment, they are still talking to Marvel to do the animation. Fred Wolf isn't even on the page on the table yet. Steve Varner has sculpted the pitch turtle. John Handy has drawn a whole cast of bad guys that are all humans. Completely different angle on the film or on the show. They hadn't even decided that the turtles were all going to be different colored bandanas. So that's January '87. So by Christmas '87, they are putting out 5 episodes. So that means that the toy company had to decide what they were going to do, create the entire cast of characters, bring in. I'm going to totally blank on his name. Peter Chung, who was the guy who did Eon Flux later. He was the storyboard artist who basically designed the opening credit sequence and then what the turtles would look like.
That was Toei Studios, right? Yeah,
exactly. So Chung gets involved and under Wolf. Wolf is like a very small studio at the time doing commercials. Could he even do it? And then you've got there you go, yeah. And so, and in that, John Handy moves back to, who's the main designer, moves back to Mattel, and they bring in none other than Mark Taylor. And this is an unknown thing, and we actually screwed up because we interviewed, speaking of people who passed away, but when we did the He-Man documentary, we interviewed Mark Taylor many times. He invented He-Man, was one of the fathers of He-Man. And yet he also was kind of the fathers of the Turtles as we know them, because he came in within that calendar year and radically redirected the line design, and he was such a bold, brass, aggressive dude that he's like, no, this is what you're doing, this is how you're going to do it, you're going to sculpt them 2 up, you're going to do them a certain way, and you're going to design them like this. But he drew, Steve Varner made the 4 Turtles based on the comic book. He had no drawings, he just sculpted them. And they went, yes, that. And they had another sculptor who did a version of them, but it was different. And then Mark Taylor comes in, and at the time, I go back to the fact that this is all to illustrate why people are mad with Fred Wolf. Is that, so at the time, you've got this footage that Peter was recording of this, which is why we have it, or why I know so much of it, because Peter recorded this one of the 2-hour Playmates toy meetings, is they're talking about making all the bad guys human, like I said, and there was going to be a face in the wall of the sewer and blah, blah, blah. That would have been the cartoon, it would have been the toys, it would have been the entire brand. So Peter kept pushing in that meeting. He said, I think we should make mutated animals. I think we should make mutants. And they're like, no, you're crazy. It needs to be humans and blah, blah, blah. So Peter was drawing a punk warthog and a punk rhino in that meeting. And he's like, this is what we should do. Peter basically invented Bebop and Rocksteady right there in that moment. So they were pushing, Kevin and Peter were pushing for control, but they were also open to interpretation. Remember, they had just done the year or 2 prior. They went from 83 inventing them, coming out in 84, to 86 doing the Turtles and Other Strangeness with the Palladium books, which was an outsider coming in and being creative in their sandbox. And they were always open to that, which is remarkable that they were doing that. That's what kept the thing alive. And so they're here again in this room allowing for iteration. Okay, we got to make this cleaner or simpler for kids to understand and not as violent. And how can we do this? So you take Mark Taylor coming in there and going, yeah, what he's saying is right. We're going to do these mutant guys. We're going to do Bebop and Rocksteady. That sounds cool. I'm going to draw what the Foot Soldier and Shredder and the van and all that's going to look like. And Mark just handed those drawings over to Anaglyph at Scott Hennessy's studio, and that's what you get. That's what that is what was delivered and set the tone for everything that came from there. So again, you're talking 1 calendar year. So the toys aren't going to come out until after the show. But the show exists only because of the cartoon, or because of the toys, right? The cartoon only exists because of the toys. So those decisions are being made really quickly, and Kevin and Peter have all this control. They have all this say. They have to sign off, remember. But Fred Wolf is going to go to Asia, like you pointed out, the studio there, and they're going to animate the show. You don't have any time to then go back in and iterate on notes with fax machines from Northampton, Massachusetts to Hollywood, California to Japan. So by the time that Wolf is doing, this is my conjecture at this point, but at the time that Wolf is saying, okay guys, it's already gone to animation, and Captain Peter was like, well, I've written out these pages of notes. What do you think? Now, they had a lot of say in that first 5 episodes. They shot down ideas like, at the end of the first 5 episodes, the Turtles were going to take over the Technodrome and use it as their base. That was part of the plan. They were going to do different things, and they were like, no. And they had a lot of input on the Baxter Stockman character and what he looked like, and they did have a lot of input, a lot of say. But once that ship left the station, or the train left the station, then it's hard to keep up with the schedule of animation. It's very, very, very fast for animation. So, it's my feeling that a lot of things got hurt because guys like Fred Wolf, established animators, are going, who are these guys? Why are they sending me notes? David Wise wasn't talking directly to Kevin and Peter, right? He's hired by Fred Wolf. So there's these layers of remove that would end up happening and then make people mad because they feel their voices aren't being heard, and then they sue, and then they counter-sue, and then everybody gets upset, and then lawyers get involved. And I think that's really where a lot of that legend of negativity comes from, is that it's just business. It's just how things happen in a creative environment, and people get heated. But then it's also very easy for people like Wise to kind of say, and I have to be careful because sometimes people get angry about this, but they, say that he came up with X, Y, and Z in the Turtles. And while that is true that he wrote those things in the scripts, a lot of those things were really established by Kevin and Peter first. And I think that unfortunately Kevin and Peter did get thrown to the wayside for a bit there, where people were like, well, no, David Wise came up with the 4 characters of the Turtles. And they're like, no, we did. So
I don't know who's really saying that, though, because why is this someone that I know because of your work? That's why I know him. That's why I know I'll give him credits yes, Cowabunga, Turtles Eating Pizza, that totally. Kind of stuff.
Totally.
And I only know that through works of people like you who have brought that to light. So, but I knew Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird because that was on the comic book I read when I was 8.
Right. Right. No, it's true. And Wise, but there again, you point out the fact that, and this is going to sound a little self-aggrandizing, but when you're doing any of these documentaries, you're getting a whole bunch of different, and this is true with He-Man, it's true with Turtles, it's true with any of the stuff we've done, you're getting a whole bunch of people's personal perspectives of what their truth was. And then we're kind of like journalists or detectives or kind of whatever, taking the truths out of what they're saying and allowing them to say those things. Yeah. So you're trying not to editorialize too much or manipulate what somebody is saying, but we can elevate what somebody's saying. We tend to try to, in our work, make people sound more intelligent than they even sounded. And not to say that they didn't. We're trying to elevate everybody and make them their best selves. So if somebody like Wise was saying things in his original interview, which of course I can remember, that would have been emphatic in how he was saying, I did this, I did this, I did this. Yeah. Then as a filmmaker, I would do things like carefully allow him to say what his truth was, and then counterpoint it with somebody else's truth. So in that, if you watch carefully in the first documentary, in that moment where David's like, here's where I came up with these 4 characters of the Turtles. Then you cut to Peter sitting in a room in early 87 before David was hired saying, here's the characters of the 4 Turtles.
Exactly, yeah.
Right?
Yep.
It presents that counterpoint.
Very well, yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's careful.
And I know it's funny because like usually there's kind of like I guess with documentaries you wouldn't think that there's like a point counterpoint, but like kind of a successor after you guys was the Toys That Made Us Turtles episode.
Yeah.
They took a lot of what you did and went in a different direction with it and stuff too. You know, that was a whole different thing too. And
you say you're not allowed to be negative on this podcast.
You can be negative. I'm leading the witness here a little bit because it's like
you just baited me hard.
I got kind of a different story from you guys that they presented, and I'm like, I don't feel like this is the first time they've reunited and whatever. So it's like And again, a lot of great things about that episode. It was great, but at the end of the day, you've got a 90-minute documentary that took 5 years to make, and you've got a 34-minute show, maybe 32. I don't know how long it was.
Yeah, it was like 30 something.
Told a slightly different story than you did, and kind of sensationalized everything to a fever pitch around Kevin and Peter. I mean, I kind of figured it out. So,
we'll put it this way: we bumped into them very early on because we were shooting Power of Grayskull when they started. So we had started shooting the He-Man documentary before Toys That Made Us began, because Toys That Made Us they came out technically right before we did, even though we had been shooting for longer, and it was confusing because they were an internal Netflix product, and we sold Power of Grayskull directly to Netflix. So then Netflix does that thing that they say they don't do, which is they position their owned product ahead of anything else's. So not a lot of people knew that Power of Grayskull was even there because they would just bury it. And we made that deal because we wanted Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, which we did as a in-house work for hire for Netflix.
I love that series. I'm like the biggest Dark Crystal fan ever, so I'll have to ask you about that sometime.
Did you watch the 11th episode, the feature doc on it?
Dude, right now I'm sitting in a room where I don't know, I'm going to try to show you this real quick. If you can see my Dark Crystal, like all my statues right over there.
Oh, fantastic. So did you realize that we had shot the documentary on it?
No, that's fantastic because
it's still there.
I would have killed to have just seen that set, like to be on it and all that.
So just to be clear, you have seen that then, right? The documentary on it?
Yes. I watched everything Dark Crystal ever. So
that one was, well, and I'll do real quick, is that again, like we sold Power of Grayskull to them kind of cheaply so that we could get in that production, because like, to your point, you're going, you mean we're going to go stand like me standing in the trenches with the puppeteers for months in England? Like you can't pass that up. So that was probably bar none the most insane work experience I've ever had. Like bizarre.
I will fully pick your brain about that on a separate interview, because
we'll do another interview.
Yeah. Wow. I did not know that was coming from this, because I was going to talk to you about Power of Grayskull, but I want to ask you another question here. Where did you find the fans? Because I recognize our friend Michelle Ivy, the biggest super fan. But one of the things that surprised me is I knew somebody from your documentary. My friend Bill from high school was in your movie. So I assume you met him at Toy Fair in New York or something. But where did you find these fans?
Bill. Which one was Bill?
Bill was the red-haired gentleman with glasses that was talking about the action figures at Toy Fair.
He was standing at the booth at New York Comic Con.
New York Comic Con. Okay.
Yeah. He was what I would call a streeter. Right, it's like it's old news footage style shooting. Right, you're standing and going, "Hey, you got a turtle shirt on. You want to talk about turtles? Tell me something you like about turtles." Right? Yeah. It's old world streeters.
I went to high school with him. I was excited. I'm like, "Hey,
that's bizarre. That's great.
So bizarre, man.
That's hilarious." Because I was going to say, because we only did a handful of sit down turtle interviews, and Michelle was one of them. And I'll admit, like, there isn't very much of the fans in there, because it's not really. There's a little short segment where they all show up, and it was always this fight back and forth between the director Randall and myself, like, of including them or not, because he was like, no, like put the creators first, which is true, because it's like the difficult thing with fan interviews in any genre, absolutely anything you do. and I myself would be just as guilty of this, if not for the fact that I can edit myself knowing what it sounds like, is it's really difficult for individuals who are fans of anything to talk about the thing outside of themselves existing, right? You can't externalize it outside of your own experience. So often we talk about, my first experience with the turtles was when my mom took me over to the neighbors, and the neighbors had these turtle toys in the sandbox, and I was too shy to say anything. My mom said, "Hey, can Isaac have a little turtle toy to play?" Okay, cute story, right? Everybody can identify with my cute story.
Yeah.
But that is my experience, and it's difficult to translate that into your experience, right? So it's easier for us, or it's more effective for us to say, here's Kevin and here's Peter. Here's the people who designed something. Here's the inside of it. And then I show you things that are reminiscent of, oh, that's the thing I had. There's my toy. There's the totem I want. Then you bring your feelings to your experience of the film. So if we sat there and just went, let's interview a bunch of fans, they're all going to say the same thing. I got turtles for my birthday. It was really fun, and my friends brought them over to play. We had them in a shoebox, and then we did this, and it's the same list. So if I cut to a whole bunch of people saying the same thing, it doesn't really, it's not a film, right? So
it's interesting, because that's the first question that I asked you, was that very question, because it's something that comes up. Yeah,
exactly. What's your experience? Where did you find it? Where's your touch points? And that's a common starting point. Like I own a toy store. I'm sitting in right now, and in the toy store there's a toy museum that's actually throughout the whole store. And so when you go to the big displays in the back of our store, and people are standing there, you can really quickly go, "Hey man, what did you grow up with?" Because in this whole thing, you could have grown up in the '60s through to the '90s and the 2000s, and you can see the history of Barbie 1 through Star Wars, through He-Man, through G.I. Joe, through My Little Pony, and Strawberry Shortcake, and all of it's there. So you can really quickly touch point somebody in time and say, well, I know exactly what you grew up with. I know exactly about what you're all about because you grew up with Star Wars. That was your thing, right? And so, like, 100%. Exactly, right? And then they're like, oh my God, I had this, and I did this, and my mom sold them, my grandma threw them away, blah, 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 right? So it is a great way in, but, Michelle Ivey was, I think, probably the first-ish, one of the earliest interviews for the whole thing. I drove down to Detroit. I only live about 90 minutes north of Detroit, and I drove across the border down there to interview her in her house back when she lived there with her parents, and it was like, I was probably 2008. She was probably one of the earliest interviews from that, and it was all because of the Technodrome forums, and there was kind of like maybe five or six super fans. So we're coming out of the 90s where you go, those kids that were maybe slightly older and in the internet early and established their foothold in internet fandom, which was a very early thing. So the Technodrome being a huge hub for that. So you had Michelle Ivey, Stephen Reese, Vaughn Michael, Rose Angelo, and I'm going to totally blank on a couple more names in there. And they were like, that was it. Like they were like the kingpins of that whole thing. So my goal was to get them all. Andrew Modine is another one. Andrew Modine, and so like those were like the core. I can't believe I remembered all those names, man. I'm just gonna pat myself on the back right now. Like I'm horrible with names. I'm really bad. I only know that your name's Eric because it's written right there. So anyway, like we had like gone out and sought them out, and I mean like when we did that first LA tour I mentioned about like when living in Kevin's place, Stephen Reese I had met because of the Technodrome, and I met him at New York Comic Con. He was there. He came out for drinks with Kevin and I at the end of New York Comic Con, and even though he lived in LA and kind of knew Kevin through cons and stuff, and then he was a hardcore collector. And at that time, for him to say, I have every single turtle toy there ever was made, was like a huge, like, oh man, you're a badge of honor. Nowadays, it's like, who doesn't, man? Who doesn't have them all? Right? And so, at the time, it was like me and the young guy, Curtis, and I flew out ahead of Randall and Mark before we stayed at Kevin's, and we spent 2 days sleeping on Stephen Reese's floor in his apartment before we shot at Kevin's house. So yeah, like they were kind of involved right from the get-go in there.
That's really interesting. That's pretty cool. Let's see. Turtle Power tells the story kind of the rise in popularity for the Turtles, but also about Kevin and Peter. What do you think is the big story of the last 10 years for the Turtles? Is it because you got Kevin and Peter who are community again? And actually on that, this is what I was going to tell you earlier, Eric's wife actually just made them each some blankets with the original Turtles.
I saw that. That's where this came from. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so what a fantastic photo that was. Oh, yeah. You must have felt pretty proud of that. That was really great. And I mean, and it was really warm-hearted, so hats off, dude. That was really nice. And to your wife, obviously, who made the...
Appreciate it.
Because it was so positive and so nice to see because, I mean... I don't think it's really a secret anymore. It was something that we didn't really say or talk about. When you look at it, anybody looks at Peter now, everybody's got old parents and grandparents. We know where his health's at, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can see where he's going. And so for Kevin and Peter to have the moments that they have together as friends, now, try not to get emotional about that, is a beautiful thing. It really is. It's like, it is beautiful to see the two dudes sitting there like old times, and it's so fragile when you look at friendships and how important they are and all those things we can all learn from that because, they hurt each other, or one of them hurt the other one more, arguably speaking, and time passed, and they didn't see each other for a long time. Like, it's Peter who says that line, which will be in the next documentary, this one's coming out, that he says, listen, when he's standing on that lawn, he says, it occurs to me I haven't spent more than 2 minutes in your company for the last 20 years. And that was like, like just gut punch. And so from that moment forward of that day in 2014, it's safe to say that they've now stayed again, they're close again, and they're friends again. So to see them sitting there, every time Kevin goes out to the East Coast, he goes to Peter's, and they have brunch or breakfast or whatever, and they just sit and enjoy their company. And it was super nice to see that. And so even though Peter, for good reason, couldn't make it out to GraniteCon, and that's why it's getting vanishingly rare to see him in public. And it was just so nice. And what a great picture. It was such a nice thing to see.
They come across as absolute rock stars, and I will say this: Peter is so dapper in that tie that he has, that silver and black tie with the vest and everything. In Turtle Power, it's just like, wow, look at this! Like, that's peak, man. Like that's that's like Todd McFarlane walking into a room, sort of like comic creator. Gods, and I'm like, they looked awesome in that movie,
and they are such a unique pairing because I can't think of a single other, like, there are lots of other comic duos. You have the Jack Kirby and the Stan Lee duo, but they were employer and employee. They were a rich man who took all the credit and a poor artist who died poor. And you look at Kevin and Peter, and I can't think of another example in art where they are so intrinsically tied together in the creation of their thing that you cannot tell where one person begins and one person ends on any page of the earlier books. It's them. And the Turtles have existed long enough, obviously, to see many other creators, to see those two men do their own versions, and they are not the same as they are when they're together. And when the two of them were together, it's the real magic. That's when it's Turtles, and then
absolutely.
Right, and that's what's so great to see them, to at this point in their lives, to be able to be remembered for the super positivity of the brand. The brand is incredibly positive, and the brand has changed so many people's lives, and it has so many amazing stories. And they themselves, as creators, even if they've had personal bumps along the road, have never had like some big scandalous thing, like one really did something bad. So they were, he bought a tank, he bought the Batmobile, he went a little Hollywood, right? and like, there's one of my favorite silly archive moments, and it's so telling, is that like in all this old footage that we found of like news footage, there's this moment where these news guys come to Northampton, and it's right at the beginning of the boom. Like, it's probably 89, 90, and it's just maybe even early 89, and it was just all jets are roaring. The money is just flying in the door, like bags of it just hitting them in the face while they're standing there on camera, and they're like, and like the reporter's like, and what does millions of dollars do for two guys from Northampton? And Peter's like, well, it's the simple things in life. We haven't gone Hollywood, as they say. And good God, you can see Kevin's face just like there's this moment where you're like, oh, this is about to go down. Like you're 8 years younger than Peter, and you're just gonna go woo, and just fly off into Hollywood and
buy a tank, do crazy stuff.
You're gonna do some crazy stuff. Limos everywhere. Me and Simon Bisley are gonna go crazy.
Yeah.
It's just gonna. It was just you. He maybe didn't know it then yet, but I mean, yeah, they're wildly different characters. They are so polar opposite from each other, and yet we're so perfect together. So what a perfect marriage.
Well, let's move on to talk about the new one. So you've got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Evolution, Mutation, Reboot. Now it's 10 years later. We've got the 40th anniversary, and TMNT is pretty much had a resurgence to the point where it's as popular it's ever been. You've got a hit video game, movie, a new series, so many action figures, and there's 6 different comic books on the shelves.
Yeah.
But what made this the right time for the new chapter?
Bottom line, well, you kind of hit. I mean, its 40th anniversary is a big one. We've been through the Hollywood ringer, so to speak, for a long time, and we're not getting any younger either. And you get to a point where you've been sitting on something for so long, and you get so tired of being told no. And just about and maybe. And I mean, there was every intention of this one coming, this second sort of follow-up, but coming out under Nickelodeon. It was basically a done deal. We had been given the keys to the kingdom. We were finally let in, and we shot everything on the last season of Ciro's show, and that was animated in Canada, so I was able to go out to Vancouver and shoot all that. And then the beginning of Rise was happening, so we were able to be behind the curtain for that. And
so cool.
So we had shot all that stuff, and we're like, okay, and we're going to hand this documentary over that was very Nickelodeon-centric. It was very much like, okay, handing over torch, and it was all about, the fans who grew up with the property become the creators. So then the creation becomes an official work of canon, fan art. And so that was sort of the thesis behind that. And so we had been sitting on it for so long, and the difficult thing... contrary to popular belief, producing content is incredibly expensive. This is something we've been struggling with, because we now live in a very different world. I mean, when we sold Turtles to Paramount, you could buy that DVD on a shelf in Walmart, and there wasn't a lot of other opportunities to get it. And there was a financial system through which you could distribute, and people can recoup their expenses and make a living doing something, right? We don't live in that world anymore. And if I was a smarter dude, if we were collectively smarter, we would have taken all the stuff we collected and eked it out in little tiny dribs and drabs on YouTube and built up a fan following over years and had a revenue stream, right? We didn't do that. We were very much tied to the idea of making these, elevating feature films, that we're filmmakers. And so we slowly but surely realized that there wasn't going to be a home where all the streamers lost faith in pop culture documentaries. They don't think that they're successful. They don't think they're worth doing. They don't pay for them anymore. Yeah. Even the streamers themselves have created a self-destroying system that will no longer make enough capital for anybody to make content, let alone us.
Oh, so that's Max. Oh,
yeah, it's coming. Yeah, it's 100%. That's what's coming. Like it's all. I mean, I'm a filmmaker outside of documentary. I mean, I've seen that in narrative filmmaking for a long time. It's collapsing in on itself. There's no the age of the star is dead. The age of big budget stuff will die because there's not enough people interested in watching it. You have a very, very fragmented audience. So, and as much as it's maybe unpopular to talk about, like it's money. It's we're talking about. Making a living and recuperating expenses. It's expensive to do this stuff. So, and I've had, during this campaign, I've seen YouTubers and TikTokers and and Instagrammers say, apparently they're charging money for a Kickstarter for this. I guess these things cost money to produce. And you're like, they're saying it with this backhanded slap to say, who does a Kickstarter for a documentary? And it's like, I'd like to pay myself back. Like, it's 15 years of flying all over North America, spending huge amounts of capital. That's tens and tens of thousands of dollars to do that. Tens and tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah. So you go, like to put this out any other way, there really is. This is the last chance, right? We're going to go, okay, let's put this out directly to the fans. And we knew, because we had done Kickstarters for other documentaries, like the one we did in Japan on Shenmue for Sega and
Great game.
Power of Grayskull. Yeah, it was that we did a documentary in Japan on that. That was really bizarre, kind of a side project that somebody else was doing, and we helped them finish. Anyway, so we knew that fans of documentaries, it's difficult to get that support on a crowdfunding platform, because there is an inherent expectation. I admit that I'm one of those people. We're all consumers of content. We know that it's going to end up on a streaming service. It's going to end up, I can download it later. Why would I back up Kickstarter to get a Blu-ray in a year and a half, right? It's a difficult sell. It's a difficult thing to say. So that's where it was our strategy to go in there and say, listen, we know it's going to be a hard sell for you guys. We're going to give you everything. Because once we hand over the archives, they're going to end up in every single YouTube mixer's thing. Because that's what people have been doing with Turtle Power 1 for years. They take it, they chop it up, they make another video essay, they put it on YouTube, and they get their ad revenue. And we don't
do that stuff. So
it's fine. I mean, whatever. I've made friends with these people because I said to them, listen, this is what you're doing already. I'm going to hand you the mother of all archive dumps. Can you just throw up something on your channel about us doing this?
Hell yeah.
Because that'll help, right? I'm just going to say it, and I did that. And so I'm going to plug in my computer so that and so they, like knowing that, we're just said, okay, listen, we're just going to throw it all out. Here's all the stuff we've collected. Here's all the photos we've collected and compilations, and let's do this massive thing. So if people wanted to own a piece of all that, and they want a big multi-Blu-ray disc set, which are expensive to produce, then we'll. Here it is. We're going to do a 4-hour film because we don't have any restrictions on content that way, and we'll put all the bonus features in there. And then to elevate the platform or the whole project, I'd already been developing a toy company for the past 6 years, wanting to actually physically manufacture toys and not go overseas, and developing technology around that. So that's why I said, let's do toys and let's do a book. The book wasn't my idea. That was Randall's idea. But
I love everything you talked about, and the fact that you're making 2 types of Kevin and Peter action figures.
Yeah, exactly.
And the snot shot.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fantastic.
So basically, and that was the idea was really to do the snot gun guy first. Sorry, I have to walk back to my microphone. The idea was to do the snot gun guy and all of the bad guys first, but then we realized, it's probably a really cool thing would be to do the Kevin and Peters, which are right here. Where I have the natural versions of them somewhere. So these are the.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Those look so awesome.
God.
So these ones are obviously not articulated yet. These are just solid casts of there's like all the fun little details like that.
That is
They look fantastic.
Yeah.
So in this, and there's sort of like a. I gotta give credit where credit's due, and I don't remember the guy's name off the Dufoot, I think he's called. Is a guy, a sculptor.
Yep.
Yeah, so he's helped us take them from Varner's. Now, Peter's glasses broke off on this one, but Varner was doing these. Steve Varner, the original sculptor, I've dragged him out of this one. I just started painting. There's a better one around here somewhere. There it is. That Steve Varner had done these very natural proportions. So we said, or actually a friend of mine's, Hans Jacobs, helping us with it. So Hans and Defoot kind of took it from this to this, and we're really pushing to do that the Playmates proportions. And I should have been better prepared. I know I have the articulated version somewhere, but people.
Those are amazing.
So here's this is really cool. This one is the first one that came back from Defoot with articulation and actual moving parts, because the legs, because we actually have to tool the. I gotta pull them apart so you can see the inside of them without everything falling all over the table. Headless Kevin. So yeah, that's
I can see his.
We have to. They're inward. So yeah, so like they're. Yeah, so that's like the inside with the articulation. And so, just pushing down. Here's missing a leg now.
These are amazing.
That was the
great perk.
Yeah, and then the Snot Gun guy, or I started calling him John Snot. So originally he had sculpted him in this pose where he was looked just like the concept art, which is around here somewhere. So like the original, right? So, but the thing is that that's not really how they would have ended up. So the foot is taking this sculpture and turning it into this pose, right? So he becomes straight up and down. His legs are squat with the bent knee thing. So we're working with him to get this into much more of the Playmate style as well. But the thing that happened during the campaign is people were like, you know what? I really like this style too. Can we get both? So I'm crazy in doing both. So
I think it's awesome. But you've got a lot of ground to cover too, because you've got both Bay movies, then you've got The Last Ronin, you've got Rise, like you were talking about, and Mutant Mayhem. So how does all this fit in?
4 hours is not going to be enough. I'll be honest. I mean, we'll probably be slightly fatter than 4 hours, but at the same time, and also we're sort of breaking our own internal rules a little bit with this one, because in the past we would often say if we don't have interviews to support it, we're not going to talk about it because we don't put ourselves in as narrators or as hosts. So this time we're going to have narration and have expert documentary or expert interviews that allow us to cover things we don't have enough content for.
Nice.
So that'll allow us to dig into some of those parts that we weren't given access behind us. Like Paramount never wanted us to talk about the Bay films; they never gave us access there. So that was very difficult to ever get in. So, but we've got some really exciting stuff we're uncovering as we speak. Like we're pulling like behind the scenes from the first movie again that nobody's seen. We've got we interviewed the director of Secret of the Use. He had behind the scenes nobody's seen. We interviewed Eric Allard and who made the suits for the third film, and the director Stuart Collard of the third film. They had stuff and nobody. So we're able to bring in a lot more stuff than even the first time. And then of course giving you can only use a couple of seconds of B-roll of something like the toy meeting.
Yeah.
Film. So why not give the whole archive? If you want to sit and watch an hour and 40 minutes of Kevin and Peter, Carl Aronian and John Handy talking about how to develop and invent the toy line, go ahead and watch it. It's all there. We're going to put it on disc,
Crazy.
And it's so people will be able to sit with. I can't say an exact number yet because we actually haven't exported it all, but like you're talking like dozens at least, like over a dozen hours of stuff on discs that we're going to include. And like one of the stretch goals we did reach was bringing in Steve Barron to do commentary over what dailies we were able to uncover from the first film. So that's all going to be included too.
And one of the things you just added as a stretch goal was him signing a movie poster.
That's because we listened to the people asking, and it was a request, and that was why we don't have anything to show, because like to show what the poster's going to look like, and I'm probably going to paint it myself, to be honest. But because we're like, whoa, that's a great idea. Because somebody said, well, you've got Barron in there. Can you sign stuff? So I sent a message to Barron. I said, would you be interested in signing a bunch of things? And he's like, okay. So we said, okay, we'll do a poster. I don't know what it'll look like yet, but it'll be based on the first film, and we'll get it out there for Barron to sign as many copies as people want. And we're gonna build out a backer kit campaign, which is pretty common for Kickstarters anyway. So it'll carry on, and we'll add other new additions. Like Barron actually has a book he wrote on his career as one of the most amazing music video directors of all time. Yeah. And then of course including his time on Turtles. He wrote a book on like the 80s. I think it's called like Egg and Chips and Billie Jean or something like that. Okay. And so it's like it sounds like a cool book. So he's got a whole bunch of copies. He said, hey, do you want to throw these in the campaign? So we'll probably throw those up in the backer kit for people to order his book directly there too. And he can get them to sign his book, right?
That's great.
So,
any chance that you're going to go after like Elias or like Sam Rockwell or anything like those guys, or are they pretty much not part of it?
I think if there's nothing stopping who we're going to try to get, other than time and money. Mm-hmm. Basically, when it comes down to it, we got like you said, we got a lot of ground to cover from the film, and we have a ton of ground to cover in terms of compiling a book and re-editing the film and making toys, which is insane.
now, something you had kind of alluded to earlier when we were talking about like fan created things. Are you planning on including any of the fan created projects in this documentary? Speaking of someone like Chris Fawcett, who wrote the book Rad Plastic, or maybe a clip from the animated Last Ronin by Magnus Edlund.
Something. Well, Chris Fawcett is in. No, did he get
perhaps
interviewed?
a TMNT podcast host?
Chris Fawcett's been interviewed for the film. I interviewed him already, and so did Matt George. They're in it. So stuff like that is in there. Again, I think it's just ground to cover. So if we focused too broadly and didn't, go outside the quote unquote canon created stuff, we could be there for days.
Oh yeah.
Right.
If you haven't checked it out, I would say check out that the animated Last Ronin. It's only like 3-5 minutes.
It's only 3-5 minutes. Magnus, I mean, if you need to get a hold of him, we can get a hold of him for you real quick. It's not an issue.
He's an animator out of Sweden, and he's making a sequel to it based on the Lost Years. Really, really amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Let's see. Because what you're doing is also, in a sense, kind of like a fan work, like you've been talking about. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of amazing that you've gotten all these people together to talk about turtles. Like, it really is. And it's some really fun stuff. Let's see. But yeah, we wouldn't really have heard about this without you guys. And the only way people would get these stories if they would have met these people at a convention and been around for like a conversation. Like if I met Judith Hogue and she was talking to this other person about her experience and something. So this is kind of like that sort of surrogate for going and standing in line and all that. It's fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. And if we can give as much of the extra stuff, then you can really live with it longer. And maybe we'll be able to even put up longer extended versions of just Judith's interview or whatever, on digitally or whatever, because it gets to a point where it gets bonkers in terms of the amount of data it is.
If it's like 8 hours, you've got to sift through it. It's like, look, I sat and watched the commentary for Lord of the Rings Extended Edition. I get it. There's a market for someone like myself.
100% you have to package it into something that is actually attainable. So you get to the point where you literally can't fit, like somebody, you deal with comments all the time during a campaign like this, and it can get really grating and really heavy because people get very vocal and they get very passionate and they have opinions, and sometimes their opinions aren't nice. And so, when people are like, "Why can't you just put it all on a Blu-ray for $30?" And you're like,
"Oh yeah." Do
you know how many minutes a Blu-ray can fit? Like it's not as many as you think. So you start doing multi-layer Blu-rays and multi-ones of those. All of a sudden, you're spending. It's just commerce. Like you need a margin in there, so you need to do 5 or 6 discs on the Blu-ray, and it's going to cost this much to produce. And not a lot of companies are making Blu-rays anymore, so the Blu-ray companies up their prices, and everything's more expensive. And then you get to the point where, guess what? It is like buying a season of television on disc. So our prices are pretty much the same as that.
I thought it was incredibly reasonable with the Kickstarter and all that. And I mean, I've done other turtle-themed Kickstarters. Mm-hmm. The Palladium game just came out.
Yep.
I backed the fan film Casey Jones Livewire, which was fantastic. We actually got a credit for the podcast. We got a credit in the film, by doing it.
Nice.
Similar with this one. I backed this one because I think it's going to be an absolute winner.
Yes.
I mean, the icing on the cake. Like I was going to back it anyway, but then when you had the Kevin and Peter toys, I'm like, are you serious?
Exactly.
I like Fry holding up that. But I love it because this is like. You're talking about going all the way back to 2008, which is the year Iron Man came out. So superhero movies and stuff like that weren't even really, that wasn't the full zeitgeist. It was like, okay, we'll get there,
Yep.
And then 10 years later, here we are. There has been so much stuff that has happened between then. This could only be a 4-hour movie, if that. And
exactly.
Video games, 6 comics on the shelves, and that's just this year. There were 7 last year. It's insane. And the amount of stuff that has happened and been influenced, right? Like fan films, fan comics, like our friend Casey and Isaac who are doing Casey Jones Amnesiacs, the animated Last Ronin, Casey Jones Livewire, and then there's like 10 or whatever other things going on. The Cerberus book where they're trying to reprint the 8th issue. Like, all these are Kickstarters. They're successful. They're going, and people have that sort of whet appetite for it. We want more turtle stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's fantastic. But what I wanted to know, is there anybody that surprised you? Because it sounds like Fred Wolf surprised you by being nice, and not even like in a negative thing, but like we had asked Kevin Eastman this question. I'm like, has anyone ever surprised you that they were a Turtles fan? He told me a great story about Jason Momoa. But like for you doing this, has anyone surprised you? Be like, oh my God, this guy knows Turtles or something?
That's a good question. I don't know if that. I don't think I am actually ever surprised by that because it is, it is so ubiquitous. It is so. If you're a certain age bracket, then you can't not be a Turtle fan, right? Like you really can't not be. It actually probably is more remarkable or surprising if you find somebody who grew up at the time who doesn't know them. And it's I can't say that I've ever been all that surprised by people who, because everybody comes out of the woodwork with. I mean, I guess like I would say that it's not necessarily surprising when you think about it, but in a way it is that it is a great equalizing brand. You can bump into somebody who you thought was a bully in high school, and you're an adult now, and you're not going to be a dick or whatever, but they're like, oh, you're doing that turtle thing, man? I love turtles. They are that positive thing, that equalizer. They're not a race. They're green. They're not super special. They're just kids that just so happen to be mutated turtles and have a martial arts skill. They are almost attainable in an unattainable way. So they're not
can personify themselves in one of
they're unremarkable in a way. And I think that an iteration I really wish we could cover more of, but it's difficult to is the latest the Mutant Mayhem. Like that film, like there's a great moment in that film where at the open, like near the beginning, where they're going home with the groceries and they're like crawling under the subway platform, and I'm like, man, I felt sad for them, right? They're so human, they're so real, and they make us feel lots of things. So, it's a fantastic brand. It's never surprising to me if somebody loves them, because how can you not?
I like that, and I always felt like it's those human aspects because there's lots of action, with martial arts and swords and bows and sais and nunchucks and all that, but it's like it's the human message that people remember, those moments. Like, oh my God, do you remember when Donnie got hurt and everybody was there? Or do you remember in the movie where, Raph wakes up, what's a guy gotta do to get some food around here? It's like that's the moment, and it's like, oh, you get chills doing it. It's so exciting. And so I guess that's true. There's I guess I would expect everybody to like it.
That's right.
Yeah. So with this, you're going into it. You're going to be talking about the Bay movie. You're going to be talking about the Last Ronin and all of that going through. Did you get a chance to read the Last Ronin and all that?
I have 3 kids now, and I haven't read a comic book for a few years. So so I know of it, and I've been around it, and we've got Ben Bishop's there, and everybody's in it and stuff. But it's like
that guy.
That guy?
Yeah.
Sorry, he's a murderer.
Yeah. I mean, but one last story on him before I probably have to go get my kids. Speaking of it, in a minute, because they're probably gonna wake up any minute. Is the I don't know if Ben Bishop. I always razz him because if you ever read Drawing Blood, have you read that?
Yeah, love it, David.
So did you notice the Canadian filmmakers in it?
I did not.
Well, we're there a lot. And it is us, but I'm portrayed as a kind of a chunkier guy with a hockey shirt on, and Randall will turn into a woman. But if you,
I didn't notice.
if you look at the, I think it's up there on the shelf somewhere. If you look at the last, even if the first graphic novel, we're in the last panel, Like it's the two. It's so we're the funny thing is we're always popping up throughout the book in these like odd spots, and talk about surprising. That was an eye-opening read in the sense that I know it's allegory and not things weren't as literally insane per se. Some things were as insane, and some things I know, and some things I don't know, obviously. But you don't realize the point at which Kevin was going through in his life when we were entering his life, right? Like when we showed up, it was like that, right? And yet you didn't really realize how much it was. So what a vulnerable thing to do.
Well, I imagine the crime parts are embellished.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like whether or not he was really in gunfights and stuff with Simon Bisley, not likely. There were some drama things in there, of course, but it's pretty accurate. It was hard hitting for us, not because we're like that. I don't mean egotistically because we were kind of in it. It was like, man, because we'd like to consider ourselves friends of Kevin, and you go and Peter, and you look at the life that he was going through in that moment. It's hard to imagine, and yet it makes perfect sense because like he was selling that house for a reason. Like when we were there, like there was a lot of that stuff was happening. So it is sort of funny. So Ben Bishop, I'm like, dude, come on. Just because I'm Canadian doesn't mean I have to love hockey.
You do that, but
anyway, I don't
like lacrosse. No,
well, fair enough. I'm not much of a sports guy anyway, but I'm a filmmaker. So it's like, but when you look at that, it's really funny because Kevin was allegory flipping things. We're Canadian, but we're French Canadian in the book, which is we are not French Canadian in real life. But the funniest thing about it is that when Kevin goes and he'll be at like conventions and people record his panel or whatever, and every time he brings up Turtle Power, now because he wrote or because he worked on the Drawing Blood with everybody, he refers to us as the French Canadian filmmaker.
Oh my god!
Because so I'm like, no. You're screwing up allegory with reality. Wow. So it's so funny. But anyway, I actually called him on that recently at London Comic Con.
At London Comic Con. Yeah. Eric, we usually ask a couple questions. You want to ask him your questions about the turtles, and then your other question that usually.
Yeah, I mean,
don't you dare ask me my favorite turtle.
Okay, fine then. I won't ask you.
I mean, why do you think I can't?
Who's your favorite non-turtle?
Yeah, who's your favorite non-turtle tertiary character or secondary?
Oh, okay, fair enough. I always like the Casey Jones toy. Or actually, when you get into the toy world, there's too many. There's just too darn many good ones because there's just so many cool ideas. It is the hardest question, and it's so cliche and so weird. I've never been able to say with any sort of have I ever been able to say with any kind of definitive answer that I have a favorite turtle.
Okay.
I just it's like I bounce between them all. Yeah,
my kids. He said Splinter, so
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. My favorite's Leo. His favorite is Raph. We usually split down the middle with the guests that we get. We find a lot go that way.
My first ever turtle I ever bought, he's out front in the store, was a Donatello. So I think that's usually what I would say. More Donatello than anything else. And then I bought him with a bunch of rolls of coins. At least I think that's what happened. It's hard to remember exactly. Yeah.
Man, that's awesome. All right, what else you got?
I mean, I know I was watching. Like I said, I was watching some of your behind the scenes stuff. I mean, I'm kind of curious, man. How did it feel? Sitting behind Pete, watching him draw Donatello.
When I was sitting behind him, that was, I'll admit, super nerve-wracking. At the time, I was not very proficient at drawing in that moment in time because it was actually through, primarily when we were filming an unreleased film that's not out yet in the history of Conan the Barbarian. I'm a huge Frank Frazetta fan, and we were working with like Mark Schultz and Bill Stout and all these amazing illustrators, and it was through doing those films that I started like. This stuff here behind me is my art desk is right here, so there's all the stuff pinned to the wall. I started teaching myself how to do ink drawing because of spending so many years filming illustrators, and that moment, that was a pretty magical day actually with Kevin, or with Peter, I should say, and and that was a super special moment because he was like, he just did this duo shade drawing, which is on the wall at the museum, and then I drew a turtle head and left it on Peter's desk, and he's standing behind it, and like, this is cool. And there's been moments like that in my career where, like, Frank's long gone, but I remember being in Frank's museum with his son, and you're behind the rope. With the camera, always gets you through things, and so I was sitting in a museum display in the museum that had like Frank's paints and his brushes and stuff out of his office, and I'm like holding Frank Frazetta's paintbrush, and I'm like, oh, the power, and it's like, there's moments like that where you're like, yeah, this is pretty cool, or even like when working with like other working illustrators like Mark Schultz and Bill Sale I've mentioned, like I've been able to, or Rudy Obrera, who did all the paintings for the Masters of Universe toy line. He did all the box art for the beginning.
Oh, wow.
Like I was able to kind of be lucky enough to call those guys mentors, because I would very bold and unabashedly be like, I'm learning how to draw. How am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? And I would just send them stuff, and they very graciously, as annoying as I must have been, helped and guided me, or sat down for hours on video calls and said, no, if you paint like this, or if you do that. I got to sit beside Bill Stout in his studio. This guy is, Bill's one of those weird, like, done everything, but yet is little known. Like, he reinvented how we think in the art world of how dinosaurs looked. Like, that was really that's what he did. And, like, album covers and movie posters and production design on the Conan films and production designer on Masters of the Universe, the film, and, like, what are the chances that he did both? And so I remember we were shooting a bunch with him for Masters of the Universe and for Conan. And I was down, he has a cool little studio in Pasadena, and I was like, he's like, hey man, I do light drawing sessions on Sundays at the studio, $10. What did he say? My notes on your work are free, but you have to ask. And I went, okay, I'm there. Like, I'm there. Like life drawing is one of the best ways to learn how to draw. Obviously, you go and you draw a real model. And so I'm like, okay, cool. So I went and hung out with a bunch of old artists who just go down and sit in Bill Stout's studio, and I'm like, cool, $10, I'm in. Like, I had a day off on Sunday, we're shooting, drive down there, and I'm sitting right beside Bill Stout, and I'm like, okay, Bill. like what a better opportunity. Like, you can't get that going to school, man.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I don't know if we had mentioned this before, but there is currently going on a book that is the Masters of the Universe and TMNT crossover.
Mm-hmm.
Just released.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah.
So it's very good. Give it a read. Promise you.
Someday when I read books again, I'll be able to.
Yeah, artwork is beautiful too. By the way, we had a little talk with Freddie himself about
Freddie Williams.
Yep. Freddie Williams and Tim Seeley.
Tim Seeley, the writer. Yep.
Yeah.
I'd love to get Freddie in the doc. Actually, he's one of the guys I want to get at some point.
Yeah, that would be the
definitely. He is absolutely amazing. A really, really, really nice guy too. I do have one more question. Okay, so it's kind of a little fight thing between me and Justin that we have. So obviously you like pizza, right? Pineapple, yes or no?
All the way, baby.
All right. This is just becoming an overwhelming victory for me, Eric.
Hawaiian, I'm sorry. Late in life, I discovered that I loved Hawaiian pizza, and I never looked back. Yep. You know what? I decided that any proceeds we get from this Kickstarter, we're just gonna, you know what, wives and family, forget paying the bills. We're gonna take those and put it into a party wagon pizza truck. Don't anybody steal my idea. Party wagon pizza truck and do Ninja Turtle flavored pizzas. Right? That's where the money's at.
Hey, I got the entire menu from Kurt Cooks, who recreated every one of the '87 cartoon.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Mushrooms and jelly beans, baby. We're there.
Dude, yaks cheese and let's see, liver and bubblegum. He said was the worst. So that was the worst.
Brutal. Can you imagine doing that legit, like a pizza truck?
He ate them.
Oh, dude!
He ate it. He made it and ate it.
That's amazing. That man is more man than I could ever be.
He's a cool dude, man. Shout out to Kurt Cooks. Big
Who's that guy? Who's that guy that there was a guy out on the internet that I can't remember who it was, and somebody was telling me about him one time, and he found the original, was it Hostess or whoever did the pizza pies, and he got the original recipe and he made them. He was selling them online. He couldn't make them into physically the same shape, but
yeah, he made the cream is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
What you're talking about.
There's so much stuff. I have, where is it? I've got the scented candle from the pies. So there's
that's fantastic.
Every one of our episodes, with the exception of very few, has a pizza recipe and all that. Do you have any suggestions for a pizza recipe for us?
You know what? I'm either super boring, pepperoni, green peppers, and onions, or a really, really nice, if you're getting wood-fired Italian, proper, margarita, fresh basil and really good dough, and just those big round circles of mozzarella, and
that's Conan O'Brien's favorite pizza. So
that's where it's at. That's OG. If you go to New York and you get a thin crust in a proper spot, the truth is when you're shooting in New York, as I have many times, you go and you ask a police officer, where's the best pizza at? And then they're like, yeah, right down there.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. They send you to Roy's Pizza, right? And you just have to watch out for that delivery boy on his screen.
Yeah, well, that's right. We actually discovered an out-of-costume Kino scene unused in the first film, and thank goodness they didn't use it. Yeah, he was a foot soldier, a background guy. He beats up a bunch of bikers in an alleyway.
Wow.
And it's some of the unreleased footage we found.
Looking forward to it.
Well, what I'm going to do is I'll ask you to hang out for just a second, but that'll be the end of this episode. We're going to lead now into our pizza recipe. We want to thank our guest, Isaac Elliot-Fisher. Be sure to check out his Kickstarter, right? We'll put links to that in the show notes. It should be going for, at least another week or so, at least?
No, it ends in 2 days.
Ends in 2 days. So we'll put this out right away. Get there, check it out, check out this Kickstarter.
But there will be a backer kit. Yeah, so backer kit afterwards. People will be able to still get it.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us on Epic Tales from the Sewers. Eric, you want to take us home?
No, first off, it's a big, big, big honor to have you on here. I mean, just to have you to give us a little bit of insight of what's going to be going on into it. And thank you for doing what you did, for giving people the history of TMNT. I know it's been a huge thing for us. I've been looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to this for long hours. Me and my son are looking forward to it. Period.
Exactly. Yeah.
Me and my son, my son, he is just as much as a turtle fan as I am. I mean, you can see my room's painted like a turtle shell. So
it's fantastic. Thanks so much, guys. I really appreciate it. No, I feel the love, and I really appreciate that. It's been a great chat from three very like-minded dudes.
All right.
I love it.
With that, folks, we'll be right back with your pizza recipe of the day.
Thanks.
It's pizza time.
And now, in a segment that we call Pizza Time, where we discuss any Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle or pizza-related food, I give you Pizza Time. And now for your pizza recipe of the day. On Isaac's suggestion, I'm going with something with peppers in it. How about Sicilian pizza with sausage and peppers? Active, about 30 minutes. Total 1 hour. Serves about 6. Ingredients: 1 tablespoon extra virgin olive oil, 1 pound ball pizza dough at room temperature, 2/3 cup canned crushed tomatoes, 1/4 teaspoon red pepper flakes, 1 1/2 cups shredded mozzarella cheese or Italian cheese blend, 1/2 pound of sweet Italian sausage, casings removed, crumbled, 1 green bell pepper sliced into rings. Step 1. Preheat the oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. Drizzle the olive oil into a 10 by 15 inch baking dish or onto a rimmed baking sheet. Place balls of dough side by side in a baking dish and pinch the edges together to make one large piece of dough. Press and stretch dough so it fills the dish. If using a baking sheet, press and stretch the dough into a 10 by 15 inch rectangle. Step 2. Spread the crushed tomatoes over the dough, leaving 1 inch more around the edges. Top with red pepper flakes, cheese, sausage, and bell pepper. Step 3. Bake the pizza until the crust is golden brown and the sausage is fully cooked, about 25 to 30 minutes. Let cool slightly before slicing. Pro tips: if you use refrigerated dough, bring it to room temperature at least 30 minutes before you start. To add some spice to this pizza, use hot Italian sausage and sprinkle with extra red pepper flakes before serving. And finally, let pizza cool slightly before you slice it. The cheese and toppings need to rest a bit before setup. And that's your pizza for today, Sicilian pizza with sausage and peppers.
Cowabunga, dudes!
Thank you for listening to the Epic Tales from the Sewers podcast. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were created by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. This podcast has no affiliation with Eastman, Laird, Mirage Studios, IDW Studios, Archie Comics, or Nickelodeon Studios. This podcast is a member of the Dorkening Podcast Network. Check out thedorkening.com for other podcasts. Epic Tales from the Sewers is recorded by Justin Cooper and Eric Will.
Everyone thinks because you're a zombie, you don't know good coffee. Well, they're wrong. We have very active lifestyles. It's not all wandering the countryside aimlessly or scaring passing motorists. And we all love a good cup of joe. And there's only one brew that gets my seal of approval. Deadly Grounds coffee is my guilty pleasure. Bold, robust, delicious. It's coffee that can wake the dead. With over a dozen different roasts and flavors, Deadly Grounds can satisfy the most finicky of coffee addicts. The aroma is so intoxicating. It brings all of my neighbors out of the woodwork. Deadly Grounds coffee. Coffee to die for and zombie approved. It's good to get a little deadly. Use the front door! Oh, they're so disgusting.
Greetings and shabebans! We are the Retro Reductopus Cephala Podcast, a long-form bi-weekly show that celebrates all the things that made growing up awesome.
Yeah, that sounds good, but I don't know what all those words mean.
I think what Parasite seems trying to say is that on Retro Reductopus we explore a range of retro goodness, from toys, video games, and movies, to cartoons, and even snacks and school lunches.
Oh.
And we do it all with a positive spin, a slew of killer guests, and some very adult language.
And you know what else is cool?
No.
This crazy show is part of the Dorkening Podcast Network with new episodes every Tentacle Tuesday.
What's that?
And if waiting 2 weeks for a new episode gives you a sad, know that we drop bonus episodes all the time, like the off-format Crow's Nest and an interview series we call The Brig.
You can listen to Retro Reductopus on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or any app that's cool enough to carry the only show that celebrates all the things that make growing up awesome.
It took me 10 years to make the perfect man cave.
And then we took it over. And we made it into the multiversal chamber.
Then I started my own podcast.
And we took that over too. And we're the co-hosts, the Multiverse Kids.
Yeah, and I'm the dad, the geeky dad. And every week, we what?
We review the movies, shows, and books, games, and toys.
Yeah, and sometimes we even have a special guest. So, join us every week on the Geeky Dad Podcast.
Hello, intrepid listeners. This is the Generation Playlist Podcast, a podcast about music where we are your guides through a particular group or artist.
We talk about the music, and then we make a customized playlist to share with you, our listener. And you can check us out wherever you listen to podcasts and find our playlists on Spotify.